The call came late, the kind that vibrates through the night like a warning you don't yet understand. I was halfway asleep when my phone lit up with Aaron's name, and before I could even say hello, I felt the weight in his silence. He asked me to check on his mom while he was stuck out of state for work. Just a quick visit, nothing serious. But when I stepped into her quiet house an hour later, the air felt heavier than it should, and the look in her eyes carried a fear that stopped me cold. This was not a simple favor. This was the beginning of something that would change both of us. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in showing up when it matters most, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel, because stories like this remind us why humanity still matters. Margaret's house sat at the edge of a small Ohio town, the kind of place where streetlights flicker and neighbors still wave but rarely knock. The porch light buzzed as I stepped inside, and the familiar scent of old wood and lemon cleaner wrapped around me. I had known Margaret for years, ever since Aaron and I became friends in college, but seeing her that night was different. She looked smaller, almost fragile, wrapped in a cardigan that seemed too thin for the season. Her smile tried to hide the loneliness, but it couldn't. The television murmured in the background, not for entertainment, but for company, and I realized then how quiet her days must be since her husband, Thomas, passed away the previous winter. I told myself I would just stay a few minutes, check that she had eaten, make sure the doors were locked, and leave. That was the plan. But plans have a way of falling apart when reality steps in. Margaret moved slowly through the house, her hands trembling just enough to notice, and every sound seemed to startle her. She tried to act normal, asking about Aaron, about my job, about the weather, but there was a tension in her shoulders that wouldn't ease. As the minutes passed, the truth revealed itself in the spaces between her words. Nights were the hardest. The silence pressed in on her chest, and sleep came in short, broken pieces. Fear crept in when the lights went out, and memories filled the dark where Thomas used to be. I found myself sitting longer than I intended, listening as she spoke about little things, about the grocery store clerk who reminded her of her sister, about the rose bush Thomas planted before he got sick. Each memory felt like a thread pulling me deeper into her world. I could sense she was holding something back, something she was afraid to say out loud. And when she finally reached for my hand, her grip was tight, desperate in a way that made my heart ache. She didn't want to be alone that night, not because of danger outside, but because of the storm inside her mind. She needed another human presence to remind her she was still here, still seen. I struggled with the decision more than I expected. Part of me worried about boundaries, about what people might think, about how Aaron would feel. Another part of me remembered my own mother after my father died, how she would leave the radio on all night just to hear another voice. Compassion battled with hesitation, and compassion won. I told myself this was what being a decent human meant, staying when it would be easier to go. I made tea, turned off the harsh overhead lights, and sat with Margaret in the living room as the clock crept past midnight. The night stretched on slowly, filled with soft shadows and the ticking of an old wall clock. Margaret eventually dozed off in her armchair, her breathing shallow but steady. I stayed awake, watching over her, feeling the strange weight of responsibility settle into my bones. Every sound outside made me alert. Every shift in her sleep pulled my attention back to her face. In those quiet hours, I understood something important. Loneliness isn't loud. It doesn't scream. It whispers until it convinces you that no one would notice if you disappeared. That realization changed the way I saw her, and the way I saw my own life. Sometime before dawn, Margaret woke with tears on her cheeks, the kind that slip out without permission. She spoke about Thomas, about how the bed felt too big, about how the future scared her more than the past. I listened, not trying to fix anything, just being there. As the first light of morning crept through the curtains, something shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it softened. The house felt warmer, less like a shell and more like a home again. When Aaron called later that morning, relief washed over his voice when he heard I was still there. He hadn't realized how bad things had gotten, and neither had I until I stayed. The days that followed brought changes I didn't expect. I started visiting Margaret more often, sometimes just for coffee, sometimes to help with chores Thomas used to handle. Slowly she began to laugh again. A quiet sound at first, then stronger. She joined a church group, started volunteering at the local food pantry, and even replanted the rosebush in the spring. Our connection wasn't born out of obligation anymore, but out of mutual respect and care. She reminded me that kindness doesn't require grand gestures, just presence, just staying when someone asks you not to leave. One evening months later, as we sat on her porch watching the sun dip below the trees, Margaret looked peaceful in a way I hadn't seen before. The fear that once haunted her nights had loosened its grip. She still missed Thomas, always would, but she no longer felt invisible. And I realized that night had changed me too. I was more patient, more aware of the quiet battles people fight when no one is watching. I understood that sometimes the most important thing you can give someone is your time. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone who needs a little more kindness, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps these stories reach the people who might need them most. And before this video ends, leave a comment below telling us who you would stay for if they asked you not to leave. Because sometimes, one night of compassion can echo through a lifetime, changing two souls in ways neither of them ever expected.